My famous last words are laying around in tatters, sounding absurd. Whatever I try, but I love you, and that's all that really matters. If this is goodbye, if this is goodbye.
Your bright shining sun would light up the way before me. You were the one made me feel I could fly.
So I think we're going to go ahead and get started. If people want to wander to some chairs, I'll give you a few seconds here to grab a beer and hit some seats. So, well, thank you everybody for coming tonight. This is our first TED Talk of the new year, which is great. We had a terrific TED Talk in December, and then our next one is going to be in April, which I think is going to be very exciting as well. But I'm particularly excited about tonight because we're gonna learn about AI, and I think everybody here is kind of in the same place that I am right now, where we're using AI a little bit. Some people are using a lot more, and hopefully we'll hear from those people and get a little bit smarter. As a reminder, kind of an update, this is part of the Neuroscience Innovative Initiative, the NII. And what the NII is as you know, on the campus here at Anschutz, we don't have a neuroscience center or institute, and we're hoping with time that we will in fact be able to bring together all of the right people and have a neuroscience institute. So until we have that, we've got the Neuroscience Innovation Initiative, and that's really a chance to bring like-minded people together, people in the neurosciences from all across the board, from all the different departments, from all the different research departments, and to kind of share ideas. And we try to get themes that cover across the board and allow people to kind of network a little bit, get ideas for projects in the future. And I think we're going to get that tonight. Having said that, our two speakers tonight, and I'll do a little bit of introduction for our second speaker at the time, but the first speaker is going to be Shane Quint. So Shane is the President and Chief Technology Officer for Sarah Health. And this is great because Shane is really from the industry side, and he's a great example of industry working with the university. We got to know Shane, well, actually many years ago when he, in their first iteration of a company they had looking at cerebral scans and predictions. Now they've kind of pivoted a little bit into the AI big data realm. He just to give a little bit of a background, Shane is a leader and an expert in the discipline supporting software development, database technology, and machine learning. His companies have worked with some of the electronic data systems, EDS, Burlington Northern, Kroger, United Artists, Shane Company, Level 3 Communications, and the rest. So kind of some big clients that he's been working with. And what he's going to do tonight is kind of give us a little bit of a seminar, give us a kind of a 101 seminar on graph neural networks. So we're going to start with Shane. Our second speaker is going to be Arjun Krishna, and I'll tell you a little bit about Arjun at the second talk. So Shane, you're up.
And there's lots of seats up here.
Thank you. You want me to drive the thing, or are you going to drive it?
No, I want
You want me to? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So again, Shane Quint. I've been doing this for a really long time. You can tell by the white hair. But 38 years of computer science technology. My experience is started out with actuarial math. Did a lot of work with life insurance companies and probability of people dying so we could rank their insurance policies, which is not a fun thing to do. And then retail, logistics, call center technology, and then the last 10 years in healthcare. Most of my career has been spent pretty much doing the same thing, which is what this cycle, data science life cycle, talks about, which is basically using data to enhance and predict capabilities in different industries. Buyer models, getting product from point A to point B in time and not having to store it as long. So it's pretty much the same thing. Done the same thing over and over again, just applied it to different data. So that process starts with understanding the business. What problem are we trying to solve? Then how do we get data to support that problem? And that's always a pretty difficult thing. Where do we get good, meaningful data that can help us make decisions? And then cleaning that data, because the data, especially like in the medical industry, is really not very well structured. Comes out of electronic health record systems. A lot of those are built for billing insurance companies and scheduling, but they're not really built to produce any kind of good diagnostic or treatment data. So we're trying to change that. Data exploration. After you get the data loaded, you have to kind of find out, are there any good, meaningful information that can correlate with a better diagnostic outcome or a treatment outcome? And then it moves into feature engineering. That's where we take that data, we structure it in a way that the machine can understand it. A lot of times that free-form text that you see in an electronic health record system or in any system really is not very well suited to put into a machine learning algorithm. So we have to take some time to structure that data. Then you can build a predictive model, and that predictive model then can determine how accurate is it going to give us meaningful information, and can we do something with it that'll help whatever problem we're trying to solve. And then visualizing that. Once we have a predictive model, you have to put it in front of the user in a format that they understand. So that's really what we've been working at Sarah Health, and that's what I've been doing most of my career. And today we're going to talk about a specific type of machine learning. It's called graph neural networks and knowledge graphs. And it's being used a lot. The technology has been around forever, which I'll talk about the history in a minute. But we're going to talk about the types of graphs, how it's being used in industry, not just in medicine, but in other industries, and then how can we build these neural networks that can give us good, meaningful information from that data. And then finally, how does it apply to healthcare? So a knowledge graph is made up of data that's structured in this format. These green bubbles up here are called nodes or vertices, and then the edges, the arrows between those, are called edges, and they're really the relationship between those data points. And this is where this technology differs from some of the other machine learning or AI that you've seen in the industry. Those relationships add another dimension to the types of analysis you can do with that data. And we'll go over more details, but an example of how it's used often and represented often is like airports in the US. Those would be the nodes, and then these lines in between them would be the relationship of how do we get a plane from point A to point B. And then what kind of data can we get around that, like delay times or weather patterns or whatever. So that's a prime example of a graph neural network in real life, and they use graph neural networks to analyze traffic patterns. The history of graph theory has been around forever. Back in 1736, this guy, Leonhard Euler, created this mathematical concept called the 7 bridges of Königsberg. Used to be in Germany, now it's in Russia, the city. But it had 7 bridges. So he determined that there should be a way to walk through those 7 bridges and get from point A back to point A without crossing the same bridge twice or backtracking. So he came up with this concept of the 7 bridges, and it stuck for a long time. They never really solved the problem because it wasn't possible, from my understanding. but it was a way to build a mathematical model that used this whole concept of not just data, but the relationships in data. And then later in 1956, this guy, Edgar Dijkstra, came up with, and he won a Nobel Prize for this, I believe, he came up with this concept of the shortest path. And so basically he mapped some areas out, put weights on the relationships between those data points, and then tried to determine what's the quickest way to get from this point to that point, and which path was the most efficient. And that's a whole other mathematical algorithm. And then the one we can relate to more readily is this page ranking algorithm that was built by Larry Page and Sergey Brin, which you might know as the founders of Google. And what they did is they came up with a graph model that could rank search pages on the internet. So it was the ability to use graph theory to sort and rank pages based on your search criteria. And that's still being used today, a version of that today. So there's a couple types of graphs that you can use in graph theory. There's the homogeneous graph, which means all of the nodes are of the same type. And this is a perfect example of that, where it's just a person, and every node is a person, and then the information that they contain is the attributes about that person. This person likes soccer and volleyball and tennis, and this person likes, the same similar things. These people like different ones. The information is trying to match Alice up with somebody, that looks very similar to interests. So this is an example of where we use graph theory, and the bolder lines mean there's a bigger relationship between Bob and Eva to Alice than there is between Kathy and David. And that's called homogeneous because we only have one type of node and one type of edge. Then there's the more complex, the heterogeneous graph, where medical data is a perfect example of that, where we have a patient, and that patient has a clinical manifestation of some disease or some abnormality, and that could contain symptoms and clinical history and laboratory tests and applies to a specific body part, and the diagnosis is given, and the treatment protocol. And those are all different types of nodes and different types of relationships between all of those nodes. It's used also in things like social media and dating apps. As you can see, this lady didn't have a good algorithm. She got matched up with that guy. So I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but it doesn't look good from this point. And then the shopping recommendation, which is, you've seen that, you've been on Amazon, you buy something or you look at something and it says, people who buy this often buy this, and that's the concept of using a graph theory for shopping recommendations. I thought we could do the same thing with the people in this room. So we could build a graph model based on the people in this room. Do we have beer drinkers? Do we have non-drinkers? And do we have wine drinkers? And I thought if we gave everyone a questionnaire about, do you drink alcohol? Do you like sweet or bitter? Do you have a favorite food? Do you watch sports or musicals? Do you consume more than 7 alcohol drinks at a time? And if you ask those questions to the people that walk in the room, you might be able to classify those people as either beer drinkers, wine drinkers, or non-drinkers. And the graph model fits into that model pretty well. You can kind of take characteristics of those people, match them against a historical database of people that either drink beer or drink wine or don't drink, and you could maybe classify those people into one of those categories. So that's a kind of a in-the-room consequence of that we could potentially identify and classify people into those groupings. How it actually works once you get the data into a graph model is here. And I'm not going to go into the math, and maybe Arjun will go into the math, but I'm going to make it high level. So we get this data, we put it into this specific data structure, and then there's this process of hidden layers where it goes through several processes where it looks for a specific neighborhood of data within the graph, where if I'm trying to predict this node's response to something, I will look at the neighborhood around it, I will compare those people based on their characteristics or their features, and I will come up with a couple of iterations that produce a training model that says, if I get somebody in that looks like this guy, then I can predict what might be the outcome from that new person coming in. And so at a very high level, this is kind of how a graph neural network works. It adds another dimension to the level of predictability by looking at the relationships between those data points, not just the structure and data that we're analyzing. And we're hoping, if we use historical data and supervised learning, that history will repeat itself. if you can match yourself up against people in whatever you're trying to solve, and you get enough of those people, and you can identify their outcome, like whether they drink beer or they drink wine, then you can match them up and you can come up with a prediction of, well, this new person that comes in that looks like that person might have the same outcome as them. And then why does this apply to medicine? So I've been doing this in a lot of different industries, like we said, retail, logistics, life insurance rating. And you get a lot of data in any of those industries, but this is an indication of the kind of data you get in just one diagnostic approach. This was mental health, and all the data that can be driven by just one diagnostic approach. There's tons of data. There's a lot of information about prior medications and prior diagnosis and symptoms and all of the information that you collect in just doing a diagnostic approach to patients. And right now, it's like impossible to diagnose accurately, I think, on just using information in your brain and not some kind of tool. And there becomes more and more information. There's new imaging techniques, there's new testing modalities, and all of that information will help you give a good diagnostic and treatment outcome, but not without some help. And I think graph neural networks can help us get to that next level. And not just graph neural networks, other types of machine learning, but graph neural networks fit that model well because you can see the relationship between all of those diagnostic inputs, the medical imaging along with the symptoms, along with the cognitive testing scores or blood panels or whatever. The next stage of that, and this is, I think, important, is a lot of the doctors that we've talked to are very concerned that the machine's going to give them an answer and they're not going to trust that answer. Like, how did that machine come up with that answer? So we've been working on, for the last year, this concept called explainability, which is once a prediction is made, can we look at all the characteristics that drove that and rank them from the machine's perspective, from the highest importance to the lowest importance, and give you a feedback that says, this is why I made that decision. This is why I made that prediction. And I think that's very important in the medical industry. Other industries really don't care. If they can make more money, selling more product, I don't care how you came up with that answer. The medical industry, I think, needs to know how come the machine made that prediction. And we're working on that. We spent the last year building a explainability model that removes individual characteristics and then weighs the accuracy of that prediction model by removing one feature at a time, one characteristic at a time, and then measuring the change and seeing how we can determine what's the most important versus least important. At Sarah Health, we built a tool called Loom AI. Basically what this tool does is automate this process. It automates the upload of graph data into a Amazon Web Services environment. It exports the data in the appropriate fashion. It structures the data. It does the feature normalization, the feature design that we talked about in that little circle on the first slide. And then it produces a machine learning algorithm very quickly, all automated. So our goal is to try to take machine learning, and especially graph neural networks, and deliver it to the people who maybe aren't data scientists. Allow other people to use this technology. And if we can automate enough of it, you may not get as high fidelity as you'd get from a manual process, but at least allows you to get into the industry and use AI. In summary, we talked about what graphs are. We talked about multiple industries they're used in today, how it's time for you to use that stuff in medicine, and then graph neural networks and explainability and how that's really important in the medical industry. And that's it. Did I make it in 10 minutes? Any questions?
I think we'll have questions.
At the end?
Let's do each one.
You want to?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, I don't want to take up Arjun's time. He's
I think.
Sure.
And Shane, if you don't mind repeating the question. So
Yeah.
I wondered if you had any specific examples where the graph neural networks for medicine came in to actually expedite a diagnosis or treatment.
Yeah, I've got a couple of examples. One is Joel was here earlier. Oh, I'm sorry. I knew I'd forget it. So examples. You're asking about examples where we've used it in medicine and it helped to expedite the process of diagnosing or treating patients. So we've got a couple of projects that we've worked on that are pretty interesting in the medical industry. Joel Stoddard was here earlier in the psychiatry department. We've been working on a project with him to differentiate in children bipolar, major depressive disorder, and healthy control group. And we built a machine learning model that looked at family history and medical imaging and a lot of different characteristics, anxiety and depression, and can we predict before they're diagnosed that they might be susceptible to bipolar or major depressive disorder. And we've gotten some pretty good results on initial data. So we'll see. We're going to try to put a SBIR grant together to take this into clinical use in the next year. So that's one example. Another proof of concept we did was for spinal surgery, and could we look at the characteristics of patients coming in to be evaluated for spinal surgery, and could we look at whether they should go to more conservative care, pain management, and rehabilitation, or whether they should go to surgery. We got some pretty good results with that too, about an 80% predictive power on that one, precision, by looking at radiological findings, their history of present illness, and their medication use prior to being evaluated. And we got a pretty good result. We still haven't done much with that beyond just proof of concept, but we're hoping we can turn that into practice later this year.
Do you have to worry about patient privacy laws or?
Oh, that's a good question. So privacy laws and how this applies to privacy laws. So in our tool, and I think most data science people are doing this today, especially with medical data, de-identification of data before you put it into the predictive model, so that by the time it gets in there, you can't follow it back to whoever that patient was initially. And we're doing HIPAA compliance. Even with that de-identified data, we're encrypting at flight and at rest. And so we're taking all the HIPAA compliant, we're putting audit logs in of data that changes. Good question, though.
Hi. My question is, how does thresholding work into your algorithm? Because sometimes when we want to be too aware of our thresholds as far as predictive values being good or bad, we tend to be overly conservative of not enough.
Right.
Sometimes I've seen cases where people have trained another machine model to predict the correct threshold.
Yeah.
So it gets very redundant very quickly.
Yeah.
So my question, I guess, is how do you sort of deal with that?
Yeah, so the question was, how do we take into account thresholding of accuracy of a prediction, right? So what we've done, and we've tried to be very transparent because we're trying to fit into FDA guidelines for clinical decision support. So basically, we don't threshold anything. We give them the straight results with multiple predictions, and then give them the confidence score of each prediction and explainability, so that ultimately it's up to the physician or the provider to make that ultimate decision on, do I trust this prediction or not? Now, in other models, though, I think you're exactly right. You have to set a threshold to say, I'm not going to accept anything below 60, 70, 80%. And then, you have to refine that. And like you said, there are ways of using machine learning to determine what the most appropriate model is. We haven't done that to this point. We've just, full transparency, push it all the way through.
That's fair. I just wanted to know if that was something you
That's a good question.
You talked about the models for the psychiatric disorders. You see a lot of comorbidities with those. How does it handle that?
Yeah, that's also a great question. So the concept is really around, especially in, oh, I'm sorry. So the question was, with comorbidity, how does that get handled within the machine learning model? So within the machine learning models that we've built so far, you could get multiple predictions back, right? You could get one diagnosis versus another, or one treatment versus another. Again, we're passing all that through. And part of the rules for clinical decision support versus computer-aided diagnostic, where you have to get FDA clearance for every indication, is that you pass all that data through. So we'll give you multiple predictions with multiple confidence scores, and then rank them from the highest confidence to the lowest. And that way, we don't really have to worry about the comorbidity. It's still there, but we're just giving all the options back and saying it's most likely this, but second option could be this. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I was just wondering, you're saying that at some point that the AI will be able to explain where it came up with the answer, so
Right.
that the physician can feel comfortable with the reasoning. How
Yes.
far away are you on that, or is that out there right now?
It's out there right now on our platform. Like I said, what we're doing for, explainability and how does that apply? I'm going to get this down yet. Explainability and how does that apply, and are we doing it yet? Yes, we are doing it, and we're doing it kind of a brute force method. So let's say we have 100 characteristics that drive that prediction. We one by one remove those predictions. We look at that confidence score and compare the confidence score with that feature in and with that feature out. And then we rank those from the highest confidence score to the lowest confidence score, the difference between removing that feature and leaving it in, so we can come up with, what drove that very specific prediction. So
it's
yeah.
like a statistical model that gives you a probability
Yeah.
of what's going to be the best chance.
Yep. Or what drove that
Best procedure.
prediction. Yes, exactly.
So for your these neural networks, the data that you're putting in, you're showing very diverse data.
Yeah.
I assume those have to be boiled down to a single number. Like you're showing like CT data versus age data. Like how do you take
Yeah.
CT data and boil it down to a single number? Is that a lot of effort on your part?
Yeah. The question is, there's a lot of diverse data in there in this heterogeneous graph model where the data is all over the place. And so there's this concept of feature normalization and feature design, where you definitely have to go through this data wrangling step where you're taking raw data and you're trying to put it into a numerical value so that it can be used within the model. And Arjun may be able to talk to this too, but that, in my opinion, is the most difficult part. The rest of this stuff is, there's models to follow, there's guides to follow, and in our case, we've automated it all. But yes, you still have to spend a lot of time designing what kind of data goes into the model. And then in a graph model, it's even more important to put information in nodes or edges, not throw it all in one place like you could do in the older models where you had a tabular format. Now you have to make a decision on, does this fit within the nodes or does it fit within the relationship? Because you can add properties to both. And so you have to make a very informed decision about where that data should go to give you the best results.
Last question. Why is it called a graph
Neural network. Why is it called?
Nothing to do with neurology.
No, but the concept is that any.
Repeat the question.
Oh, why is it called the graph neural network? You were loud enough. I thought that would get you. So the reason that they call it a graph neural network or any neural network models are basically that it was designed to kind of mimic the way the brain works, like with relationships and synapse within the data points. So, and Arjun may have a better explanation than I do on that one too. But the concept was that it tries to mimic the way the brain works, and that's why they call it a neural network. All right.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So I left out the fact that we kind of got involved with Sarah Health and got to know Shane because he's working on another project with spatial transcriptomics, which talk about a lot of data. I mean, it's a tremendous amount of data that he's, at this point, it's very preliminary, but trying to put all that together is an inconceivable concept for me. So thank you very much, Shane. So Arjun Krishna is going to make all sense of all of this to us. So Arjun is an associate professor, and he really is representing the biomedical informatics and artificial intelligence program, works with Casey Green on campus here. Just to give a little bit of idea of what his lab, Arjun is involved in building predictive and interpretable models of genes, molecular networks, and tissue mechanisms that underlie heterogeneity of complex diseases. That's a mouthful. So what he's going to do is talk to us tonight about decoding the dreams of machine learning and artificial intelligence in neurosciences. So, Arjun, thank you.
Thanks a lot for the opportunity and for the very nice introduction. It's not related to neuroscience, but it's just in general. So this is going to be my only slide about my lab, I think. So what we do is to constantly think about genes, molecular mechanisms, and cellular function, especially in the context of complex diseases and traits. Okay, so what we do often in the lab, many projects in the lab revolve around this idea of taking massive amounts of publicly available data. So this is not the data that we collect from one hospital or one experimental lab, but this is data that's available to all of us right now. But this is millions and millions of samples. So we collect data of various types, genetics, molecular data, text data, and then ultimately what we want to do is to make predictions about the molecular level, cellular level, and the gene level. And then my whole lab is across all these projects, we are always thinking about algorithms, how do you optimize computing, and then how do you develop software and web servers and all that stuff. Okay. So this is the scope of our work. Okay. All right. So to give you maybe a slightly more specific example, so this is something that I worked on a while ago, and then we are continuing to develop, which is to understand the genetic basis of autism spectrum disorder. And then at that point, when I started this project, we basically knew about 60 or 70 genes that were strongly associated with autism spectrum disorder, and then but we knew from epidemiological data that there were many more genes that are likely to be involved. So the question is, how do you start with a small number of genes that you know to be related to the disease, and then predict other genes that are likely to be related? Okay, so that's the idea. So okay, how many of you have built a machine learning model before? Great. All of us, the rest of us are going to do a thought experiment. I actually build it right now. Okay. Okay, so the way we're going to do this is very similar to what Shane said. We love graphs. So for example, our graphs are what we're going to call social networks of genes. Every single node is a gene, and connections between genes are basically whether they work with each other or not. That's it. So we have these very large networks. And then what we did was to basically figure out, zoom in a little bit, and then basically say that we know a couple of genes that are related to autism. Let's say those are the blue genes. And then we also know a bunch of genes that are not related to autism based on strong evidence. Those are the red genes. Okay. So here is a network. And here is a question for you. If I told you about this new gene here, can you tell me whether it is related to ASD or not? How many of you think it's not related to ASD? Okay, great. How many of you think it's related to ASD? Okay. So here, you're making this kind of prediction. It's actually quite interesting, right? This new gene is actually not directly connected to known ASD genes. But its friends are very similar to the friends of ASD genes, right? So this is how when you log into LinkedIn, it will say, here is your long lost middle school friend you might want to connect with. You two are not connected on LinkedIn, but your current friends and their current friends are very similar, okay? So you can basically use intuitions like this. There is an underlying algorithm behind it, but that's what these algorithms really do. They basically say, okay, this is likely to be a blue gene. That's it. You've built your first model, okay? Congrats. All right. Now, so what we essentially did was to try and do this with gene interaction networks and actually predict a large number of genes associated with autism. We were able to actually, verify this with sequencing data and so on and so forth. So that was pretty cool. So this is networks. There is also, this is not, everything beyond this is not our work, okay? So for example, this is image data. So this is one of the first excellent applications of machine learning, especially in clinical domain. So this was a project that started off as a 20% project in Google, when somebody said, okay, why don't we take these diabetic retinopathy, retinal scans and then predict diabetic retinopathy, because predicting this is a problem, because the disorder, the condition is very frequent, but there are not enough doctors to actually look at the scans and actually, make this decision for the patient. So the question is, you're given images, can you make predictions? So what the original researchers did was to basically collect a large number of images that the doctors had already taken a call on. A bunch of images that they are healthy, the other images where it's from a patient who has this condition. Okay, and then you train a neural network model. You can think of this as, again, a machine learning algorithm. This is similar to the neural network that Shane was talking about. It looks like neurons and synapses. Okay. And then ultimately the question is, given the image alone and this training data of whether we knew whether it's healthy or disease, can you actually predict from the image the final status? Okay, that's this question. So if this model is completely trained, what this allows you to do is to say, now a new patient walks into the clinic, you take their retinal image, you can supply that image to this model, and then it will make a prediction of whether it's likely to be from a person with the condition or not. Okay, so it gives you a probability. This model, for example, is famously called a deep neural network model, okay, because it's deep, because it has multiple layers, and then it's a neural network because there are so many connections. Now, this is already old technology, okay? Because in 2011, there was this massive, idea in machine learning, AI, especially artificial intelligence. If you today hear this word of artificial intelligence or any model that basically does anything that looks like intelligence, it's not using a model like deep learning model, but it's using something called the transformer model. Okay, the transformer model has two things going for it. First, it has this property of being multimodal in the sense that it can actually take in data of many different types and then still train the model. And the second is that it actually does not require labeled training data. What this means is that, remember in the previous example I told you that we had to show this network how images from a healthy individual look like and images from a diseased individual look like, right? In these models, we actually don't have to even have this labeled data in the first place. So for example, I'm going to go back to the same problem of distinguishing between diabetic retinopathy based on images, right? So this is a performance of a transformer model, not the deep learning model. And now this model can not only predict, just from the image of the retina, can not only predict diabetic retinopathy status, it can predict myopia, glaucoma, ischemic stroke, Parkinson's disease, and myocardial infarction, everything from the same retinal scan. And here's the thing, this is not based on 6 different models. This is based on a single model that was trained. Okay? And now, if you think about how this model was actually trained, it was trained on 1.6 million images, retinal images, but it is called unlabeled. These images were not already labeled for all these, diseases. They were trained by basically this idea called self-supervision. So if you wanted to really sound smart in the AI field, you basically say, I'm going to train a model that does self-supervision. Okay, this is how all the models work right now. Okay, so for example, let me give you an idea of what self-supervision is, right? How many of you have used ChatGPT? Okay, yeah, right. So ChatGPT has been trained using self-supervision. What this means is that nobody told ChatGPT, here is how language works. What ChatGPT did was to consume all the text in all of internet, but it devised its own task internally. And the task is that if you give me a bunch of words, I'm going to try and predict the next word. That's it. So what it's going to do is to grab sentences from the internet, delete a word randomly, and try to say, based on the remaining words, can I predict this word? Even models like this do self-supervision by basically saying, take all the images, I'm going to randomly take off pixels from the image and try to predict what the pixels that I just took off. That's it. No external labels, just the data. Okay? All right. Now, here's where we are going in the future. This is going to happen in the next few years, which is not only look at image data, but go truly multimodal, which is images, EHR data, signals, omics, graphs, all of them together. And then these models will also be able to accept text input and audio input. We are already speaking to our phone, right? And then we are already typing things in, so they can take all these in. And then this is also going to be able to interact with a lot of knowledge bases. So this is not just data driven, but also anchored on knowledge that all of us have spent accumulating over the past centuries. Okay, so this is literature, publications, clinical notes, knowledge graphs. And then finally, even at the output level, these models are going to be super interactive, where the clinician is going to be asking questions and exchanging questions and answers, and even that output is going to be multimodal, which is going to be audio, text, and anything like this. All right. So for example, these are all applications that are already coming up. So for example, now there is a way to do augmented procedures where a clinician will basically, there are already models that will look at an image and make a claim, but then the clinician can actually ask, can you explain the object that's appearing on the left of my screen, and then it will give you an answer. So it already knows to look for this part of the image and then create an explanation for you. Or for example, when the model says, based on this X-ray, I predict osteoarthritis, you can go back and ask, why did you make this prediction? And it will tell you that narrowed joint space and osteophytes and so on and so forth. Okay. Or at the bedside, when the model says it is doing continuous monitoring of patients, and then it suddenly sends you an alert, says there is insulin required, you can go back and ask, why do you think insulin is actually required? And the model will be able to say to correct a particular condition. Now, this is all clinicians. One of the things, this is not some far-fetched future. Today, 84 clinical trials are happening across the world where they are testing AI algorithms. So this is like a drug, but it's a randomized control trial with artificial intelligence algorithms. Okay, so this is happening all over the world. Because right now what we want is not just, this promise of something being real, but we actually want concrete evidence, and lots of people across the world are doing this. Okay, so the one last piece that I want to talk about here is that we talked about clinicians. What about the patient, right? So this is Alex. Okay, so Alex was 11-year-old, I think, and then he and his parents were on a 3-year odyssey to find a diagnosis, and they went through 17 doctors, dentists, and then here are all the conditions that Alex had. Okay, unexplained and increasing pain, arrested growth, dragging left foot, severe headaches, other symptoms, no explanation whatsoever. So desperately, out of desperation, Alex's mother took all these symptoms, put this into ChatGPT, and then ChatGPT gave this diagnosis of occult spinal bifida. It's actually a great, the story has a wonderful good ending, right? This was actually correct. So the doctors went ahead and performed surgery, and Alex is actually doing very well now. Okay. This is going to happen over and over. It's not just about clinicians or experts. Patients are going to take their reports, their diagnosis, put this into these algorithms, and actually interact with them. Okay. The same with this one. There was a patient who was actually diagnosed with long COVID, but no therapy was working for them. They punched in all of the symptoms to ChatGPT. ChatGPT gave them a good diagnosis, and then treatment, antibody testing confirmed this diagnosis, and then now there's perfect treatment for it. Okay. Okay. Now, I've told you what are all the awesome things about AI, right? So I want to sort of say that a bunch of us who are working in this field, we are also trying to be very serious about what are all the shortcomings and how to actually circumvent them. Okay. So George Bach has this wonderful quote that all models are wrong, some models are useful. By the way, these are actually real posters, statistics propaganda posters. You can actually go and buy them in Etsy if you want. All right. Okay, so now, I talked about super complicated models, right? Let's wind back all the way and think about super simple models. So for example, I'm sure all of you have made plots like this, a scatter plot of variable 1, variable 2, and you basically fit a line, okay? Have all of you fit a line? Okay, right, okay, good, excellent. So if you fit a line, you've actually built a model, because this is what models do. What this model does is that, based on this red line, if you now give it a new variable value y, variable 1, it can actually predict the value of variable 2. That's what this model does. All right? Okay. Now for the simple model, this simple model can actually be tricked. So for example, here this is actually data from a 1968 sociology paper, where the authors basically measured voter turnout and income inequality, and then found out, they basically reported that there is a strong negative relationship, which means that if income inequality is very high, voter turnout is going to be very low. Okay? 4 years later, somebody actually thought to take the numbers from a table and actually make a plot, and this is what the plot looks like. When they made this plot, there is actually no relationship, except that this one point is driving the whole relationship. Okay? So if you actually remove South Africa, these two quantities have no relationship. So extreme data points can always trick things. Somebody asked a question about privacy. There is also this very deep connection between extreme data points, privacy, and bias. Okay, so I'm happy to talk about this later. All right. Now, here is another plot. If I told you that the correlation between two different variables is close to 0, do you agree that if I actually make a plot, the plot will look like this? Sure. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for playing. Yes. All right. So, right? So even a plot like this, even a data like this will give you a correlation of 0. The point is that we're just picking the wrong correlation, right? So misapplying models to data of certain types is also problematic. Okay. Now, finally, when we have massive amounts of data, which is what all of us are dealing with. Now I told you there is so much data that these models can ingest. If models are very good at finding associations, even between pairs of variables that potentially don't have anything to do with each other. Here I'm actually not true whether it has something to do with each other or not. Okay, you can guess. Okay, all right. So it's actually very important to be very careful about all these models. All right. Okay, another point. How many of you have heard that AI models can be biased because the data is biased, right? Okay, all right. It's good. Sorry?
Isn't it like garbage in, garbage out?
Yes, but also, for example, bias in terms of representation, good having being able to make good decisions for every person in the population, for example, right? So this is very commonly discussed, but biases can also creep in from many other types of sources. For example, algorithm development can itself have bias. So for example, let me actually talk about this privacy thing, right? So one of the things about these complex models is to ensure privacy in the sense that you should be able to interact with the model and get an output, but nobody should ever be able to sort of reconstruct the data that was used to train the model or even the model weights. Okay, this is a very strong requirement for privacy. Now, one of the ways to actually algorithmically achieve this is by doing something called outlier detection during training and remove outliers. So because outliers actually push training weights a lot from the current training models, it will basically say, I'm not going to use it because if I use it, a person who's actually using my model can detect this pretty well. Okay, but outliers is what all we have, for example, for underrepresented groups. Okay, because the majority of the data is from the majority of intersectionality, right? So algorithmic development can also have biases. How do we pick problems? How do you even define problems can introduce a lot of bias. And also, once the whole model is built and how are you actually going to deploy this in real conditions, those are going to make huge differences in terms of bias, misalignment, and inequity. All right. So this is not a slide that I'm going to go over, but people are already thinking about this. So for example, now there is something called MI claim, which is minimum information about clinical AI modeling. So if you ever want to do AI modeling, and if you wanted to especially publish this, you might have to fill this whole checklist to basically say at every step here is what I did, and then these checklists are actually used by reviewers right now. Okay. Another problem is that we shouldn't have one type of people working on this already, right? So for example, if you look at the North American BSMS at PhD at CS level, there is this distribution of white Asian. It was pretty poor. It's gradually becoming better. But for example, if you just look at all PhDs in the AI field, it is still very bad. Okay, we actually need way more diversity in this area, especially diversity in the people who are actually developing the algorithms too. All right, and finally, it is important to actually engage with people who these algorithms will actually affect. Okay, in development. So this is going to be absolutely important. All right, and I think this is my last slide. There is plenty to do in terms of training and education in this area, not necessarily just in development of algorithms, but also expertise in how do you actually use this effectively. How do you find out, what does this accuracy mean? How do I understand all the failure modes of these algorithms? These are going to be very important. All right, that's it. So this is my awesome team. These are the people who actually do the real work. I get to talk about that work. Okay, and then all the people who pay us to keep the lights on. And thanks for listening. Yes.
Okay, I have sort of a comment and a question. If
Yes.
That's okay.
Yeah, please go for it. Yes.
Comment-wise, as far as like what this affects or who this affects, and also to your bias point, there was a study done a couple years ago on how they trained an AI to try to go through applicant tracking systems for jobs.
Oh yeah.
And names and backgrounds that were they were flagged to be, let's call it ethnic, because I don't know how else to put it, have actually been flagged down by the AI because of the model, like the training data that it used to be trained. So that's definitely something to
For sure.
think about. But as far as my question goes, actually, back all the way at the beginning of your slides, you said that you had this ocular retinal scans.
Yes.
That you were using the same model for a bunch of different things. This is probably going to be a sort of very particular question, but what did you use to try to get Parkinson's disease from that?
Yeah.
I've done a lot of Parkinson's disease
Very good. Yeah.
pathology, and I'm not entirely sure how it works retinal-wise, and I wanted to find out.
Yes. Excellent. Oh, this is a very long question. Okay. I will.
Question tonight.
Yes, exactly. So okay. So there was a comment which is about really having to seriously think about data biases that went into training these models, and the question was about how was this model trained, especially to only look at neural images and still make predictions about something like Parkinson's disease. First clarification: this is not our work. So there's a paper that was published just last year. It's a phenomenal paper, and so this model actually works at 2 stages. Okay. So the first stage is actually taking all these 1.6 million unlabeled examples, and then learning patterns in retinal images. And then the next stage is to basically, this is very, very common, which is that you train a model without any supervision or without any labels. And stage 2 is to fine tune the model for specific tasks. Okay. So the second level fine tuning is where you can actually say, now that you have learnt all the patterns in retinal images, take these patterns and then try to predict this particular disease condition. And then for that particular final stage, they'll have a small amount of training labels, a small amount of images and a small amount of training labels. So you can actually fine tune it. So the last step, all these predictions are based on the second step fine tuning.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Yes.
Can I just reflect? So
Yeah.
at some point you had to feed in the disease for each of these unsupervised retinal images, right?
Yes.
You had to.
Yes. Yes.
So the first stage is just grouping them into like these are different somehow.
No grouping.
Unsupervised
No grouping.
is just
Show
what
it.
does it give you?
Yeah. So give it all 1.6 million images, and then every time what the algorithm is going to do, if you give it an image, it's going to randomly pick off a few pixels and delete those pixels. And then it's going to say, let me go and try and predict those pixels. That's all it's doing for every image or 1.6 million images. But by doing that process, it learns something about the relationship between various visual features within these images. And once those features are learned, then you can stick this task on top of it and say, now that you understand images so deeply, I'll give you a small amount of training data. Now make this prediction for me.
So in Chinese traditional medicine, they say the eyes are the gateway to the soul, but also
Yes,
they
there you
can
go.
tell from the medicine what they need to give you based on your eyes. So you could actually add a lot more on this.
Sure.
So you show a lot more diseases from that.
Sure. Yes.
Please try to repeat that question.
Ah,
Or comment.
really?
No. You just add more diseases on the eyes.
Yes, for sure. Yes.
So, awesome presentation. What is the threshold for enough data? Like, how many records do you have to put in? And then
At stage 2, you mean how much data you need for stage 2 or for stage 1?
stage 1 in.
Oh, okay. It needs to be this large. It needs to be hundreds of thousands. So, for example, ChatGPT, it's all of internet, all text and all of internet, really. Yeah.
Okay, so you need 1 million to 2 million, 1.5 million, or somewhere in that range to like get good results.
So, let me back up a little bit. Yes, it is important to have that much data to train models like this, but for future, there are many models that are already being trained on these massive data sets, which we can repurpose. So it's not that for any new application that we want, we need these many samples to actually train. For example, this is image. If our input is going to be image, there are already models that are being trained on image data that we can then supply a small amount of our own data to fine tune it.
So it kind of depends on what you're working with.
Yes, yes.
And then how long does it take to take like this range of data and actually like create the model?
Yes. Okay, very good. So currently there are even academic labs, 95% or 98% of the academic labs do not have capability to actually train these models because these models have billions of parameters and they have a huge carbon footprint and they take months to train. Okay. So this is another reason to actually take pre-existing models. So I'm sure even this group will not be training new models from this point on. They will actually train the existing model, take this model and then fine tune it a little bit for different tasks. And all these models are already available for all standard data sets. There are models for text, there are models for images, there are models for audio. They are available off the shelf. You can take them, fine tune them a little bit. Yes. Yes.
Okay, if there was no one else. I think what may be a little bit helpful here is to try to define
Yeah.
unsupervised versus supervised, just for like a reference point.
Yeah, excellent. So, I mean, this is a really good difference. This is supervised learning, where you even at the beginning, even to train the model from the beginning, you have to provide the labels for the tasks that you ultimately want to do. So it learns patterns. Self-supervision is completely based on patterns in the data itself without label information. And you can provide label information at the end with small amounts of data. So same with ChatGPT, like I said, what basically it does not know how to actually answer questions, and answering is not something that ChatGPT knows at the beginning. Right now we can ask a question and it will give you an answer, but all ChatGPT learned was take all the text, I'm going to randomly delete words. Based on the other words, try to predict these words, and that's all it did over and over and over with all the text. By that process, it had gathered some deep understanding of how words and language works, and now you can fine tune it a little bit for different tasks. For example, you can fine tune it for question answer, you can fine tune it for summarization and so on. Okay, am I making sense? Okay. Okay. Yes, yeah.
One last, I guess this is sort of looking forward. You kind of went through all the examples of where we're going to go and all this AI stuff, but then the tension of the AI is going to make mistakes.
Oh yeah.
And if you're training, 1.6 million, who's testing these mistakes? How are we ever going to be confident in these models?
Yeah.
If we can't check all that data that it's drawing from.
Yeah, actually, this is a very good point. I was chatting with Shane before this, and Shane was also talking about explainability and all that stuff, right? Mm-hmm. In my mind, explainability is important, but it is not the be-all and end-all of things, in the sense that even already in medical practice, we accept so many things and do so many things without understanding the underlying mechanisms. But the important thing is validation, right? Extremely strict validation. We might actually give a drug, we might not know the mechanism, but we choose to give this drug because it has been validated really well with large clinical trials, the data looks good, and so on and so forth, right? I think very similar things also need to happen with AI algorithms. Of course, explainability is important to pursue, but it's not like it needs to happen right now for us to trust. So a lot of work and emphasis needs to be on clear validations, especially rigorous independent validations. And the second thing is all these clinical trials that are actually happening across the world also trying to do this. So what they would do is to actually collect a large population of people, feed data about a part of the population with this model, train the data completely, and then make the model make predictions on a bunch of people they have data for and they know the ground truth, but were never seen by the model. And then they make predictions, create these good performance metrics, and then try to do this across many, many sites. One of the things that is very important to do here is also train across sites. So for example, one of the early machine learning models that can take a look at an X-ray image and try to predict, let's say, some cancer status or whatever, it did very well, for example, in one hospital. And then when the model was used to make predictions on images from another hospital, it completely failed. So somebody went and looked at why this model actually failed. It turns out that in hospital 1, whenever somebody thought that there was particularly a tumor there, they would basically staple a report onto the thing so that it passed on to the next thing. And then when the model was trained, they would basically remove that thing and train the model. So all it did was to detect whether there was a staple mark on the top left. That's it. Okay. So it's really, really important to make sure that these models are trained from diverse data and tested on data that is completely independent of anything that was used to train these models. So there are many checks and balances that we need to do here. It's not a simple problem. Yeah.
This brings up an extraordinary question.
Okay.
Not that many years ago, I'm old, but at a Society for Neuro-Oncology, they brought up the idea of how do you get a patient into a clinical trial? And this is for high-grade gliomas, glioblastomas. And they sent all the slides to a batch of pathologists and say, what is this? It ranged from, and these were all patients who should have been enrolled into the trial, high-grade gliomas, grade 4, what we call them today. Their interpretations ranged from normal brain, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, all the way to the high-grade glioblastomas. How do you account for this? How do you put that into these models and then say that we can solve this problem? This is extremely disturbing because these are patients who should have been enrolled in a trial and weren't or absolutely were. I don't know how to deal with that.
Yeah, I mean, the question is,
These were the same slides sent to the same pathologists.
Right?
The pathologists made these different interpretations.
On the same
So
image.
this is these are patients getting into a clinical trial or told they don't have a brain tumor, which wasn't true because the brain tumor came out. So how do we account for the human variability in this?
Yeah.
In these situations, and these should have been people who were trained, right? These went through the system. Damn, what do we do?
Yeah. So let me ask you a question back. So, for example, if you took a majority vote of all those people who are actually
That's
doing
a good
this.
question. I don't actually know that answer.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
the fact that anybody
Right.
thought this was not a glioblastoma, a high-grade glioma,
Yeah.
I don't know how to deal with that. How do you factor that into these sorts of equations?
Yeah. So, sorry, I have a very long answer, which probably I shouldn't start.
Colloquial, which I'm sure embarrassed an awful lot of pathologists.
Yeah.
But in any case, that's what.
Very important question. Yeah.
Wouldn't it be more data? You just get more data.
You are, yes.
More data is not always the
but
answer.
somebody wasn't getting into a trial when they should have been because they were told
But you think that those
They pulled
pathologists,
the damn tumor out of their head.
but most of the pathologists would have gotten it right, and if you had more data to inform.
I
As
don't know
opposed
the
to one
answer to
image?
that, but the fact that that was that much of a discrepancy.
I think that argues for AI more than.
Well, yeah, does it? I don't know. I'm gonna.
Yes.
I got one final question. It's for both Shane and Arjun. What kind of computing abilities do you guys have to do this sort of thing? Yes. I mean, it seems phenomenal. You can't do this in your office.
So we use all Amazon Web Services, so it's like unlimited, just what you want to pay for.
Yes.
I don't know what you're using.
Google Cloud. Yeah. Google Cloud platform.
You're using computer systems outside of your own labs.
Yes, yes. But we stopped using the systems in our lab probably 9 or 10 years ago. Yeah, my laptop is just a window to something else. Beautiful out there. Yeah.
It's in the cloud now.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Thank you guys.